My name is Joe, and at 73 years old, I learned the hard way about the importance of watching what we eat, especially at night. I'm going to share with you a story that completely changed my perspective on life and health, starting with an event that shook our community here in Rosewood Gardens. It was a Tuesday morning when we learned that our friend Al, 68 years old, had passed away during the night. He was my domino partner on Sunday afternoons, a man full of life who always had a joke on the tip of his tongue. The news caught everyone by surprise, especially since the previous Sunday he was there, sitting with me in the park laughing and planning his grandson's birthday party. "Joe," he told me that last Sunday, "today I'm going to make those pork rinds you love so much. My daughter-in-law brought a special pork belly from the country." I still remember him licking his lips, all excited about the idea. Al was always like that. He loved good food, especially before bed. "There's nothing better than going to bed with a full belly," he used to say. But it was precisely this habit that, according to the doctors, contributed to his premature departure. When we learned that the cause had been a heart problem related to his eating habits, especially the habit of eating heavy foods before bed, it was as if lightning had struck our senior community. Miss Carol, our retired nurse friend who lives down the street, gathered all of us at the community center for a serious talk. "We need to learn from what happened to Al," she said, in that motherly way of hers. "Just because we've reached this age doesn't mean we can neglect our diet." That's when I started reflecting on my own habits. How many times had I done exactly the same thing? That piece of fried sausage before bed, the leftover donut holes from the afternoon coffee, even that extra slice of pizza my daughter always brought on Fridays. "You know, Joe," Miss Carol said, holding my wrinkled hands between hers, "our body changes with age. What we could eat at 30, 40 years old doesn't do us as much good now, especially at night, when our body is preparing to rest." She then explained to us, with the patience of someone who has taught for a lifetime, how our metabolism slows down at night. "It's like a factory that slows down to do maintenance," she compared. "If we overload the system with heavy foods, it's like forcing employees to work overtime when they're already tired." Losing Al taught us a valuable lesson. It wasn't just about avoiding certain foods, it was about self-love, about taking care of our body that has carried us for so many years. It was about being present to see our grandchildren grow up, to participate in more birthdays, more Sunday domino games, more moments with those we love. I decided, at that moment, that I needed to change. It wouldn't be easy, after all, old habits are like deep roots. But I owed it not only to myself but also to the memory of my friend Al. His passing needed to serve as a warning, a call for all of us seniors to rethink our relationship with food and our health. And so began my journey of change, a daily learning process about how to take better care of myself, especially in the choices I make before going to bed. But this is just the first part of my story. There's still much to share about what I learned on this journey towards a healthier life in my golden years. After what happened to Al, our community here in Rosewood Gardens changed quite a bit. Miss Carol started organizing weekly meetings at the community center to talk about healthy eating. It was at one of these meetings that I truly began to understand the impact of the foods we used to eat at night. "First, let's talk about fatty foods," Miss Carol explained on a particularly memorable afternoon. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, remembering the piece of pork rind I had eaten the night before. "Remember old George from up the street?" she asked the group. "How could we forget? George had a big scare last month. He had to be rushed to the hospital after eating a generous portion of fried pastries before bed." "The problem isn't just the fat," Miss Carol continued. "It's that our body, especially at night, has more difficulty processing these foods." At that moment, I remembered the countless nights I woke up feeling heavy, with that feeling of discomfort after giving in to the temptation of a fried sausage before bed. "It's like putting thick oil in a delicate machine," she explained. "The blood becomes more viscous and our heart, which is no longer that of our 20s, needs to work twice as hard." Mary, my 75-year-old neighbor, timidly raised her hand. "What about sweets? My grandson always brings cake when he visits me at night." Miss Carol smiled kindly before explaining the dangers of very sugary foods before bed. "Remember Mrs. Wilson?" she asked. Everyone knew Mrs. Wilson's story, who had diabetes and had a serious crisis after eating sweets late at night. Our body becomes more sensitive to sugar during the night. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire that's already going out. It causes a big imbalance. That's when I realized how much my own routine needed to change. All those nights eating bread with bologna while watching TV, the donut holes my daughter brought, even the hot chocolate I loved so much before bed. All of this was affecting my health more than I imagined. But it was when Miss Carol started talking about spicy foods that I really got scared. Tony, my next-door neighbor who loved spicy food, had to be hospitalized last year after overdoing it with a spicy dish before bed. Spicy food is treacherous, Miss Carol explained. It raises our blood pressure, agitates the body at a time when it should be calming down. It's like playing drums when everyone wants to sleep. It causes quite a commotion in the body. At home, I started taking inventory of my pantry. I found packets of chips my grandkids had left, smoked sausages I loved to fry at night, even that jar of pickled peppers my buddy brought me from down south. I realized I needed to make serious changes. My daughter Rachel, when she found out about the meetings, decided to help me. She started preparing meal portions suitable for my dinner. "Dad," she told me, "you need to be here to see Julia, your granddaughter, graduate from college, and the way you were eating before bed, it was difficult at first, very difficult. That urge to snack on something tasty before bed doesn't go away easily, especially when you've had that habit for decades. But I started noticing changes. My sleep improved, that feeling of heaviness in my stomach decreased, and even my blood pressure, which had always been high, started to stabilize. One night, while drinking my chamomile tea, Miss Carol's suggestion to replace stimulating drinks, I found myself thinking about Al. If he had had the chance to learn what we were learning now, maybe he'd still be here, playing dominoes with me on Sundays. And that's how little by little our community started changing. The stories of scares and hospitalizations due to inadequate nutrition started decreasing. Even Tony, the spice lover, now drinks lemon balm tea before bed. Of course, we still have our slip-ups. Just the other day, I caught myself wanting to fry an egg at 10 at night. But now I know better. As Miss Carol says, it's not about never eating what you like again, it's about choosing the right time for each food. And so we continue, learning each day how to take better care of our health, especially in the hours close to sleep. After all, as the saying goes that we invented in our meetings, a well-fed night, a prolonged life. The meetings with Miss Carol continue to change our lives in Rosewood Gardens. In one of these meetings, she brought up a subject that particularly resonated with me: the foods we should avoid not only at night, but throughout the day. "Today we're going to talk about something many of you love," she began, looking directly at me. "Joe, do you still eat that liver and onions every Sunday?" I felt my face flush. It was true. Every Sunday I prepared a hearty liver and onions, a recipe I had inherited from my mother. It was my pride, and I often invited neighbors over for lunch. "It's not that you need to stop completely," Miss Carol explained in her gentle way, "but we need to understand that animal organs, like liver and chicken hearts, are high in cholesterol and purines." That's when old Gary, my fishing buddy, raised his hand. He had suffered a gout attack the month before, and the doctors related the problem to his habit of eating chicken giblets almost every day. "It's as if our body were an old car," Miss Carol explained. "Over time, we need a more refined, lighter fuel. These foods are like adulterated gasoline. They might work for a while, but they end up damaging the engine." That night at home, I looked at my refrigerator with different eyes. Besides the liver, there was sausage bologna and those preserves I liked so much. I then remembered old Ben, who lived on the corner. Ben was famous for his seasoning. Every Saturday he prepared a feijoada that attracted the entire neighborhood. "It's the secret to longevity," he would say proudly. But 2 months ago, he had to be rushed to the hospital with sky-high blood pressure. The doctor was categorical. He needed to cut out processed meats and very salty foods. At the next meeting, Miss Carol brought up a topic that generated a lot of buzz: fried foods. Margaret, who had been selling pastries at the fair for 30 years, was particularly attentive. "Remember Milt's case?" Miss Carol asked. How could we forget? Milt had a small bar down the street where he served the best fried snacks in the area. He ended up having a heart attack while preparing his famous pastries. "Frying oil is like poison for our arteries," she explained. That's when I remembered my own history with fried foods. Every Saturday I prepared French fries for my grandchildren. "Grandpa, make those crispy potatoes," they would ask, and how could I resist? But after Miss Carol's explanation, I started thinking of alternatives. I learned to make seasoned baked potatoes, which to my surprise, were just as successful as the fried ones. The most delicate subject came when she started talking about alcoholic beverages. Old Oscar, who had his nip every day before lunch, was visibly uncomfortable. "Our liver isn't what it used to be," Miss Carroll explained. "It's like a sponge that's been used a lot. It doesn't absorb and clean like before." She then told the story of her own father, who drank moderately but still developed liver problems after 70. But it was when we got to the topic of cold foods that many people identified with. Celia told how she loved to drink cold milk before bed, a habit she had since childhood. "But now, every time I drink it, it seems like my body complains," she confessed. "It's like throwing cold water into a hot pan," Miss Carroll explained. "The thermal shock can be harmful, especially for our circulation." At home, I started keeping a food diary, noting everything I ate. It was surprising to realize how many of these villains were part of my routine, but instead of despairing, I decided to make gradual changes. First change, I swapped preserves for fresh seasonings. My small garden in the backyard gained new inhabitants: parsley, chives, basil. "Dad, have you turned into a farmer?" my daughter Rachel joked. Then, I learned to bake foods instead of frying them. I discovered that roasted chicken with herbs was much tastier than fried. And my grandchildren, surprisingly, they loved the changes. "Grandpa, this baked potato is tastier than the fried one," my granddaughter Julia said to my delight. The hardest part was reducing the consumption of liver and onions. It was more than just food, it was a family tradition. But I found a middle ground. I started preparing it only once a month on special occasions and in smaller portions. Our community started exchanging healthy recipes. Margaret, the former pastry maker, now prides herself on her baked pastries. Old Oscar swapped his nip for a glass of pure grape juice. And me? Well, I discovered that cooking healthily can be just as enjoyable as following the old recipes. The secret isn't to prohibit everything, Miss Carroll often says, but to find a balance. And she's right. Little by little, we're learning that taking care of our diet doesn't mean giving up the pleasure of eating. It's just a different way of loving life and ourselves. Now, when I look at my new eating routine, I think about how much I've changed since that first meeting after Al's passing. Each meal has become an opportunity to take better care of my health, to be present longer in my grandchildren's lives, to honor the memory of friends who left too soon. It was a particularly cold June night when I had my own scare. I woke up around 3 in the morning with a strange feeling in my chest and a cold sweat that left me frightened. At that moment, I remembered Miss Carroll's words about the importance of recognizing the signals our body sends us. "The body talks to us," she always said in our meetings. The problem is that it takes us a long time to learn this language. Never had those words made so much sense as on that night. At the meeting following my scare, Miss Carroll decided to dedicate the entire session to talking about the warning signs our body gives us, especially during the night. The community center was packed. It seemed like everyone had a story to tell. "I'm going to start with something that happened to our friend Joe," she said, making me blush instantly. "But don't worry, Joe. Your experience can help a lot of people here." I then told about my night of fright, how I had eaten a heavy plate of beans with sausage for dinner, even after all the guidance we had received. "The body is wise," Miss Carroll commented. "It always warns us when something isn't right." That's when Lorna, a 78-year-old lady, who always sat in the front row, raised her hand, trembling a bit. "The other day I woke up with such a strong dizziness that I thought the world was spinning," she recounted. I was afraid to get up to go to the bathroom. Miss Carroll took advantage of the report to explain about the different types of signals our body can send during the night. She took out a large poster she had prepared and began to list the main ones. "First, let's talk about sudden chills and fevers," she began. "Remember Bernard's case? How could we forget? Bernard, our neighbor from up the street, woke up one night with a high fever. The family took a while to realize something was wrong because he didn't want to bother anyone. When they finally checked on him, it was a serious infection that could have been treated earlier. If you wake up feeling abnormally cold or unusually hot, don't ignore it," Miss Carroll warned. "It's like a fire alarm. Better to check and find out it's nothing serious than to ignore it and regret it later." Teresa, who had lost her husband 2 years ago, raised her hand with tears in her eyes. My Tony complained about difficulty breathing for several nights. I said it was just tiredness, that it would pass. Her voice faltered, and everyone in the room felt the weight of that memory. Difficulty breathing or chest pain should never be ignored, Miss Carroll emphasized, her voice more serious than ever. They're like a red light on the car dashboard. They need immediate attention. That's when I remembered my own father, who used to say that real men don't complain about pain. How much has this mentality harmed us? How many friends have we lost because of this silly pride? Jack, an 82-year-old gentleman who always participated in the meetings despite mobility difficulties, shared his experience with cardiac arrhythmia. "It starts like an offbeat drum in your chest," he described. "At first I thought it was normal for my age, until the day it was almost too late." Miss Carroll took the opportunity to talk about the importance of paying attention to irregular heartbeats. "It's like an out-of-tune orchestra," she explained. "When the rhythm is off, the whole ensemble suffers." Dizziness and vertigo were another topic that generated much debate. Clara told how she started feeling frequent vertigo during the night, but didn't tell anyone for fear of losing her independence. "Until the day I fell going to the bathroom," she admitted. "Only then did I realize I needed help." "Dizziness is like a traffic warning," Miss Carroll explained. "Sometimes it indicates that we need to slow down, other times that something more serious needs to be checked." Abdominal discomfort, something I particularly knew well, was the last topic of the night. How many times had I woken up with that bad feeling in my stomach, that heaviness that seemed would last forever? "The stomach is like our second brain," Miss Carroll said. "When it complains, we need to listen carefully." She then told us about different types of abdominal discomfort, and when each one could be a sign of something more serious. That night I went home thinking about how many times I had ignored my body's signals. How many nights of discomfort could have been avoided if I had paid more attention? I started keeping a diary of nighttime symptoms, something Miss Carroll had suggested. I noted anything different I felt during the night. At first it seemed like an exaggeration, but soon I noticed patterns, certain foods that always caused discomfort, times that were more problematic. "The body has an ancient wisdom," Miss Carroll often says. "Our task is to relearn how to listen to it." And so, little by little, our community was learning this new language, this way of taking care of each other by paying attention to the signals our bodies send us. Today, when I wake up during the night, I no longer ignore what I feel. I've learned that there's no shame in asking for help, in admitting that something isn't right. After all, as Miss Carroll says, better a false alarm than a late regret. It's been a year since we started our meetings at the Rosewood Gardens Community Center. A year since we lost Albert. A year of learning, changes, and discoveries. Today, at 74, I can say that I feel more alive and willing than I have in a long time. In one of the last meetings, Miss Carroll surprised us with a simple but profound question. "What do you think it means to age healthily?" The initial silence was broken by Mr. Gilbert, who at 85 was the oldest in the group. I thought it was just a matter of luck, but now I know it's much more than that. Miss Carroll smiled and began to talk about the importance of regular checkups. "I confess that I was one of those who only went to the doctor when something was already wrong. Men don't need doctors," I used to say, repeating what I had learned from my father. That's when she told the story of Mrs. Judith, who discovered a heart problem during a routine checkup. If she had waited for symptoms to appear, Miss Carroll explained, it could have been too late. That made me think about how many times I had postponed important exams. Now I keep a schedule with all appointments marked: cardiologist, ophthalmologist, dentist. My daughter Rachel was so surprised by the change that she even joked, "Dad, have you become friends with the doctors?" But it wasn't just a matter of medical exams. Miss Carroll always emphasized the importance of keeping the body moving. "It's like a machine," she would say. "If it stays still, it rusts." That's how our walking group started. Every morning at 7 o'clock we meet in the square. At first it was just me and 3 other friends. Today we are more than 15. There's even a waiting list to participate in the stretching group that Mr. Robert, a former physical education teacher, started giving after the walk. "You should see Joe playing ball with his grandkids," Mrs. Margaret commented in one of the meetings. It's true. Before I could barely run after them in the backyard. Now I make sure to participate in the games, of course with moderation and respecting my limits, as Miss Carroll always emphasizes. The issue of nutrition continued to be fundamental. We learned to create balanced menus, to choose healthier foods, to cook in different ways. Our community garden, which started with 3 beds, now occupies the entire empty lot next to the community center. Every vegetable we plant is one less medicine we need to take, says Mr. Anthony, who has become our urban agriculture specialist. Who would have thought that the same man who couldn't live without his hot sauce would now be the neighborhood's biggest enthusiast for natural food? But it was when Miss Carroll started talking about the importance of first aid that I realized how much we still had to learn. It's not enough to just take care of your health, she explained. We need to know what to do when something goes wrong. We then organized a basic first aid course with the help of the health center. We learned about the recovery position, how to act in case of choking, the signs of a stroke. Knowledge saves lives, Miss Carroll repeated, and how true that is. Last month, Mr. Charles managed to help his wife who was choking, using the maneuver he learned in the course. If it weren't for what I learned here, he said emotionally, I don't know what would have happened. But perhaps the most important lesson we learned was about mental health. There's no point in taking care of just the body if the mind isn't well, Miss Carroll would say. That's how we started our game afternoons, our knitting groups, our conversation circles. For me, who had been isolated since my wife Mary passed away, these activities were a true revolution. I discovered that I wasn't alone, that there was an entire community willing to share joys and sorrows. Grandpa, you're different, my granddaughter Julia said the other day. You're happier, more willing. And she's right. I learned that aging doesn't mean giving up on life. On the contrary, it's an opportunity to live it more consciously and meaningfully. Today, our Rosewood Gardens community is different. The meetings at the community center continue, but now they're more than health classes, they're celebrations of life. We have our choir, even if not everyone is in tune, our dance classes, even if some only move their arms, our reading groups. We don't stop learning just because we got old, Miss Carroll often says, and how right she is. Each day is a new discovery, a new chance to do better, to live better. Albert, my friend who left us too soon, would be the first to approve of all these changes. Sometimes during our morning walks, when the sun is rising and the air is fresh, I can almost hear his laughter, see his approving smile. And so we go on, one day at a time, learning to age with grace and wisdom. As Miss Carroll says, age is just a number. What matters is how you choose to live each of your days. Now, when I look back at that Joe from a year ago, I barely recognize that stubborn man who thought taking care of health was a woman's thing. Today I know that every choice we make, every habit we change, every step we take towards a healthier life is a form of love. Love for ourselves and for those we love. And you who are reading my story, remember, it's never too late to start. As the saying we invented in our meetings goes, the best age is the one in which we decide to live better.